Hello, NEMA friends. My name is Darren Pomeroy, and I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. On behalf of the Pomeroy Foundation, we are delighted to be a NEMA conference sponsor again this year. NEMA has done a wonderful job creating this dynamic virtual program, and we hope that you're having a rewarding experience so far. The Pomeroy Foundation is back again because we want to help you celebrate your community's history. One of the main ways that we do this is by providing grants for roadside markers at no cost to you. It's clear that markers make an impact, whether it's educating the public, promoting historic tourism, or encouraging pride of place. As of today, we have funded over 1,200 markers and plaques nationwide across all of our signage grant programs, including Legends and Lore, which you may have seen in your conference program. Head over to our exhibit booth today to learn more about us and enter our $100 Amazon gift card giveaway, or check us out anytime on our website at wgpfoundation.org. We want to hear from you, so let's connect.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon session. Thanks for joining us here. I just want to begin quickly by having the panelists that we have here all sort of introduce ourselves very quickly, and then I'll explain what the session is going to look like. So my name is Jonathan Fanning. I use he, him pronouns, and I work in the Community Initiatives Department at the Museum of Science, Boston. And Cayman, why don't you go second here?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Cayman. I'm Chief of Staff of Greentown Labs. Greentown is the largest climate tech incubator in North America, and we're based in Somerville, just a couple miles from the Museum of Science.
Hey, everyone, and I'm Jacob Barry. I'm the Corporate Relations Manager at the Museum of Science in Boston. So I help to build partnerships between the museum and corporations that help advance our mission or advance our STEM education mission.
All right. So what I'm going to do to get started is just share a little bit about what the Go Carbon Neutral Challenge is, give a very quick overview of it, and sort of its history and where we're planning on going. But then I want to turn this panel over mostly to Jacob and Cayman to talk about the partnership aspect of it, because I hope that what you're taking away from this session is not necessarily that you could reproduce this program for yourselves in its entirety, but rather how you can use this sort of model to potentially reach out to funders and create these sort of productive funded partnerships that allow you to support your workforce, increase the accessibility of your institution, and shift away from sort of the ticket-based revenue models that we're all kind of paying the price for right now during the pandemic. So the Go Carbon Neutral Challenge is a partnership between the Museum of Science and General Motors as the funder, and then Greentown Labs as sort of a local community partner. And one of the things that I want to emphasize throughout is that Go Carbon Neutral is just sort of one piece of a much larger movement within the museum that as we begin to recognize our role in the community and start to increase our own accessibility. Because the mission of the museum is to inspire a lifelong love of science in everyone. And beginning, a few years ago, we even started to realize that our old model of accomplishing that mission by bringing people into our doors and collecting admissions fees was in many instances counterproductive to that mission and was creating more barriers than actually allowing folks in. And so over the past few years, we've begun this process of trying to think of the museum less as a destination and more as a convener that advocates for science and technology. So specifically, we like to see ourselves as a convener of community organizations where we can promote the use of science and technology, and as part of those convening sessions, help to solve society's problems through a larger collective impact. And Go Carbon Neutral specifically grew out of a desire to address three different issues that we were hoping to address. And the first one was expanding our audiences, specifically to college age individuals, because we realized that we were often missing those particular individuals during, we were very good at catering to children, we're very good at catering to families, but we kind of missed that section in the middle. In addition, we also have been trying to improve our community engagement. We've spent the past few years expanding our sort of international presence, developing educational curricula, which was all well and good, but we found that it had sort of reduced our local relevance. So now we're trying to increase our local relevance and reassess how we can integrate ourselves into the fabric of Boston life. And the third thing we wanted to accomplish was to take clearer stances and increase our advocacy on social issues, increase our social impact. So in this case, that very specifically applies to climate change. We as an institution want to take a very clear stance that climate change is an issue and an existential threat, and that through science and technology, we can provide solutions to it. And so what came out of trying to sort of merge those goals together was the Go Carbon Neutral Challenge. Again, a partnership with General Motors as the funder, Greentown as our local community partner. And on its face, it's a competition where undergraduate student teams between 1 and 4 individuals from New England schools are tasked to propose a transportation solution that helps Boston achieve its goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. But again, that's just sort of the outward facing facade of the challenge. We have our own sort of internal goals that we're hoping to accomplish with this challenge, as well as General Motors' goals as a funder. And for us at the museum, those goals are first and foremost to create meaningful engagement with undergraduate students. We want to convene green tech entrepreneurs to provide competitors professional development, networking, and mentorship opportunities as part of that meaningful engagement. We want to improve undergraduate perceptions of their own agency, their own self-efficacy in developing climate change solutions so that they can potentially become professionals that will continue to create those real-world solutions outside of these sorts of challenges and competitions. And lastly, we want to promote science communication. As a museum of science, that's one of our primary goals, and we love to be able to pass that on to experts in the field or future experts in the field. And so the challenge began in 2019, and it was an in-person challenge. We got 8 semifinalists that created proposals, and semifinalist teams, I should say, and all of those teams were invited to our community partner Greentown Labs for a networking event where they came and we sort of had these facilitated conversations with Greentown members. So to talk through the competitors' proposals, to sort of think about different issues that might arise, that they could make their proposal a little bit stronger for sort of a final presentation, as well as just sort of general professional development, how to find or how to sell a customer your idea if you're going into green tech entrepreneurship, doing cost benefit analyses on these sorts of plans and proposals, things like that. And then all of that culminated in a Museum of Science poster session where those competitors developed a large poster. We set all of those up in a wing of the museum, and they got to chat with the public passing through for several hours, as well as a panel of judges to sort of walk through their proposal and all the different ways that they thought about it. We then had sort of like an awards reception and dinner where we invited General Motors representatives to show up. We had a local senator stop by and had a panel discussion about the significance of climate change and sort of ideas that we could toss around for future solutions. So really nice event, really well received by all those involved. And the plan for 2020 was very similar. We just more or less expanded our marketing efforts to try and get more people involved, increase the number of people that were seeing the event. We quadrupled our number of registrations, but I've put up sort of the important dates that we shared with our registrants to show you more or less in real time what ended up happening to our 2020 plans, which was registrations closed on February 28th, and then the Museum of Science closed to the public, I think 2 weeks later. So we had about a week's notice. If you could read the tea leaves, in reality, we got about 30 minutes notice as a staff that we were going to close to the public. But we had already started to think about what sort of virtual resources we had available to potentially continue that challenge for those people that had already filled out registrations. What we did not expect is that 2 days after we closed to the public, the museum closed to staff, and we were all sort of sent home and told to work from home indefinitely, which was really difficult. And at that point, we sort of began to think, well, could we actually go through with this challenge? Or even if we could, because we assumed that the students would be able to still produce proposals, should we go through with the challenge? Could we actually still accomplish those internal goals of ours and still maintain that sort of professional development and networking aspect to the competition when all of it would be virtual and not in person? And the solution we came up with was to extend the proposal deadline. So those that had registered then got the entire month of March to sort of figure out what their proposal was going to be. And we took that month to figure out what sort of virtual resources were at our disposal and how we could potentially create professional development workshops for those competitors that still managed to complete a proposal. So to give you an idea of what those proposals looked like, they were anything from just an essay that came in talking a little bit about background and proposal, all the way to much more complicated infographics depending on the specialty of the students that were involved. We were, of course, most interested in the content, not the presentation of those, particularly in a virtual format. We had no idea what we were doing. We obviously did not anticipate that our students would be able to know immediately what they were going to do. And what we developed were sort of online resources for professional development. And the first thing we created was a Slack workspace. We went with Slack because we had passing familiarity with it, and mostly because it was free. And at the time, I didn't know how to actually request funds from the accounting department without walking across the building and presenting them with a paper to request funds. So I didn't know if we had any money, so we went with a free Slack workspace. And Slack was good for a lot of reasons. It allowed us to create channels for each team so that those competitors could keep in touch with each other. They could then share video files, they could share audio files, they could share written files to try and keep on track with the competition. And what else it allowed us to do was to assign each team a mentor. And what we found is in this new virtual world, because we weren't confined by a particular time or a particular geography, we could actually expand the number of community partners we could use for this particular aspect. So we went back to Greentown, asked if they had any members who would mind mentoring. They said absolutely. And we got some mentors. Each team ended up with their own individual mentor, some from Greentown. We had some museum mentors, and then we even went back to GM, which is obviously based in Detroit. Couldn't have been more involved previously, but we said, hey, now that we're doing this mentorship online, do you want to be involved and become mentors for some of these student participants? And they agreed, so we actually had a few GM mentors take over and help advise some of the students. And then in addition to the mentoring that we did over Slack, we also created a webinar series over the course of May, which then focused on sort of those networking and professional development goals. So some of these webinars, we reached out to community partners who were experts in the field to sort of talk about different issues associated with climate change, to hit that as a big topic, obviously the theme of the competition itself. But we also reached out to some of our more just general professional development partners to talk about things like creating an elevator pitch and how to apply that to their proposals so that they could successfully sell it to the public. Or we had one, how to use LinkedIn resources for professional success, which was just sort of looking at how can you sell yourself as a potential green entrepreneur? How can you use these sort of virtual tools to help yourself as you're entering the business world? And what we had changed the competition to, instead of a giant poster, what we said is that each of the competitors now had to create just a one-page infographic explaining their project, which we would post on our website, as well as a 2-minute video where they could sort of go through the information on the infographic, and we would open that up to a public vote on our website. So this is what the winning entry ended up being. You can still see all of these on the website at the bottom of the screen there. If you're interested in seeing, there's some really interesting proposals that we got. I'm going to play just a couple of minutes of this video so that you can get a little bit of an understanding of what they were like.
Last year, Boston pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. Reaching this goal means that the city will have to cut down significantly on its greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, almost a third of Boston's carbon emissions come from transportation, and 75% of that is from private vehicles. Each year, cars in Boston emit so much CO2 that we would need almost 300 million square feet of rainforest to capture it. For reference, that much rainforest would cover over 20% of the city. It's no secret that more traffic means more emissions, and our city ranks as #1 for the worst rush hour traffic in the country. More than 2/3 of the state roads are congested at 5 p.m. In the past 5 years, traffic in Boston has more than doubled, and without significant change, it is expected that by 2030, the number of private vehicle trips in Boston will reach 1 million trips a day. We need to be reducing our carbon footprint, not taking more trips that emit more CO2. But how do we influence when and how Boston commuters travel in order to reduce carbon emissions? Taking a toll on Boston's carbon emissions is our answer to this question. To reduce these emissions, we have a 3-step solution. The first is to implement a new highway that fluctuates in price corresponding to the flow of traffic. These funds will then be directed towards public transit and bike lane infrastructure projects to promote cleaner modes of transportation. The final step is to create an app that incorporates the functionalities of a variety of existing transit apps with a focus on cutting carbon emissions and time spent in traffic.
All right, so I'll leave it there. Again, if you want to take a look at those, you can view them on our website. They're still up there for the public to see, and I'll throw the link in the chat here in just a second. But what really impressed me about that particular entry, and what I love about it, is that that team of 4 was actually completing that video across 3 different states and 2 different countries, because in fact, one of them was Canadian and had to return to Canada as part of her quarantine. So just to show like how blown away we were by the quality of the entries that we received and the tenacity of our competitors to create these really, really impactful and creative solutions and proposals. And so in that respect, it remained very, very successful. But how did we do in terms of our own internal goals? Well, we got over 1,500 people to vote on those proposals before we selected our winner, as opposed to just a couple of hundred that had come to the event the year prior, the public that just sort of passed by. These were individuals who presumably watched at least one of those videos, perhaps many of them, in order to determine a favorite. And so we really expanded the reach of the challenge in general. And then we did pre and post surveys of as many competitors as we could track down. That ended up being 16 in total. There were 26 total competitors. 16 of them filled out both the pre and post survey to see if we had hit our internal goals. So the first one was just sort of overall, I enjoyed participating in this program. They were asked to fill out based from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Any answers in agree or disagree are in orange. So you can see we had a lot of agreement. Anyone who filled out that survey said that they enjoyed participating in the program, which is pretty great to hear. We also had some qualitative analysis. This is one of my favorite quotes from them. Thank you so much to the people organizing. It's been one of the highlights of my quarantine. Learned a lot about transportation systems, teamwork and making proposals, science communication. One of the most exciting things I've done even outside of quarantine. Thanks for the support. Keeping this continuing during this time is a crazy achievement. So if that is not meaningful engagement with a science institution, I'm not sure what is, right? Moving on to sort of competitor agency, how they feel their own actions impact climate change solutions in the real world. This is a graph showing their answers on the before survey on the top, the after survey on the bottom. Again, orange being disagree and the purple and blue being agree and strongly agree. For the statement, confident that I could develop ideas for mitigating climate change, you can see that there's a pretty clear shift from a few disagreeing to much more agree and strongly agree after the competition. For the statement, confident that I could take actions for mitigating climate change in my community, you also see that shift into agree. And then in terms of the impact of science communication in general, confident that I could communicate ideas for mitigating climate change with the public. We got, again, that nice little shift into agree and strongly agree. And confident I could communicate ideas for mitigating climate change with scientists and other scientific community leaders. And again, a nice shift into agree there. A couple things I want to mention about all of these. Obviously, sample size is fairly small because we've only done this competition and only did it virtually once. The second thing I want to mention is you can see a lot of our competitors were already in the agree and strongly agree categories. And that kind of speaks to the people that we have already been talking to. Or who have already been part of the STEM pipeline. They already feel like they're fairly confident, and that is currently the types of students who are applying. As we continue to grow carbon neutral, we're looking to expand so that we can hopefully get a few more individuals who don't necessarily think that they have a voice in STEM and can use this challenge as a way to convince them that they do have a voice within the STEM community and that their perspective matters. And then the third thing I want to mention is we also took some qualitative analysis around this, and one of the major problems or one of the major deficits, I should say, that competitors had is even though they felt like their ability to communicate was improved, they didn't feel like they got to communicate very well with the other competitors. They didn't feel like they got to know their mentor very well. And that was all because of the limitations of Slack, right? We picked this sort of virtual platform on a whim, flying by the seat of our pants, and we were pretty aware that we were going to get that feedback because we saw it ourselves, that there wasn't a ton for like in-face coordination and meaningful engagement across a virtual platform. So that's one of the things that we're beginning to consider as we look into the future, because we've already gone back to General Motors and looking at the success of this competition and thinking about how we can potentially continue to increase and grow it. We asked them for an increase in funding. They were kind enough to grant that so that we can continue to do it. And we have some additional goals upcoming. The first is that we want to leverage virtual resources to expand the challenge to partner institutions outside of New England, get more museums involved to increase the reach of the competition. And as well, we're no longer locally based because we have this sort of virtual infrastructure. So we can actually make it a climate change competition in general, not just a climate change competition in Boston. We want to expand our efforts to include minoritized voices. Spoke a little bit about that afterward. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A as well. We want to create meaningful virtual mentorship opportunities for competitors. Again, we're sort of trying out various different sorts of virtual platforms like this Whova site, right, which have all popped up to hopefully get a little bit more meaningful interaction between our mentors and our competitors. And we want to expand the number of community partners to increase our post-competition potential and impact. Ideally, we're not just creating a competition that is meaningful for the time that they're doing the competition, but we're giving these students a voice so that they continue to go out into the real world, potentially make contacts so that they can develop professionally moving forward, find a career in sort of climate change mitigation and things like that. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jacob and Cayman here. One last thing, we had invited General Motors to come and speak at this panel to sort of really get their perspective and why they chose to fund it. And unfortunately, our contact there, Matthew Ibarra, is transitioning to a new role within GM. And so they're going through some staff turnover and weren't able to make it. So what I did instead, just because it's always great to hear it from their own lips rather than Jacob kind of translating it here, I took a clip of him speaking to the students at our award ceremony for this year's competition to sort of give you a little bit of an idea of why General Motors would fund a project like this and the goals that they have, which we are hopefully helping to achieve with the challenge.
And then again, I want to come back and really just thank the students again for your participation, your innovation, and your ideas. We know that the current pandemic and all of the impacts there, it certainly doesn't eliminate the need for addressing the urgent climate crisis. We know at General Motors we're working towards our vision of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. We know that in our 100-year existence, in our journey to bring mobility to individuals all around the world, that certainly has had unintended consequences, and recognize that it is definitely both important and urgent that we move forward towards this future of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And we see that being an all autonomous, all electric future. I would just like to close again with saying what a pleasure it's been to see all of the innovation coming from our student participants in this year's challenge. I'm inspired by seeing your solutions and your proposals. I know that this is just a start. I hope that you found this challenge to be very beneficial in your journeys with these initiatives. And I hope that many of these initiatives that, again, this is just a springboard that have prepared you to continue them both throughout your academic career and beyond. These are game-changing solutions that will help both the New England region and the city of Boston, and as we're looking at reducing emissions across the country and across the globe. So thank you so much.
All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jacob now to talk a little bit about what that sort of proposal was to GM and how we sort of work with them to ensure that we continue to get funded.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for going over the program so well. I think that, in this partnership and pretty much every other, really successful corporate partnership we have, the key is always in this case and always, I think, is connecting the dots between the museum's goals and objectives and the objectives of our partners. So, it's like, what is, and I think this is a good example of what that looks like in practice. So, in that video that you just showed, Matt, referenced, General Motors' zero vision for, zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And in particular, like that middle one, zero emissions, is, it's all about, addressing climate change and the climate impacts of transportation. And so, as a company, they've, committed to, making their vehicle fleet, all electric moving forward. And so, they've very publicly made a, commitment to addressing the ways that transportation has impacted, climate. The second thing is that, STEM education is, a key pillar of their, social investment strategy, or you might also call it their, corporate social responsibility strategy. They want to, build, the next generation of leaders and innovators in science, technology, engineering, and math, with a particular focus on underrepresented and diverse groups, and doing that through a big focus on mentorship. So and sort of another thing that we haven't mentioned yet is sort of the government relations angle as well. In sort of presenting and marketing the Go Carbon Neutral Challenge, we made a conscious effort to tie it to the city of Boston's vision for being carbon neutral by 2050, which is being spearheaded by the Mayor's Green Ribbon Commission, of which the museum is a part. And we've also been successful in engaging some of our state legislators, most notably Senator Boncore, with the competition as well. So it's like we had there are sort of three sort of key things that that we were able to engage General Motors with helping to promote their zero vision through the marketing of the program. Being able to tie it to that, helping to advance their, STEM education goals, helping to advance some of their government relations goals, and helping to, and the thing I didn't mention that I think we were, really, really happy about this iteration was advancing some of their employee engagement goals, with having a couple employees serve as mentors to the, the semifinalist teams, having one of their employees present to, during a webinar during the program. So I think because of those like multiple angles that we were able to engage with, I think it's built a really solid partnership where it's not just focused on like one thing, but we've got sort of multiple things that we're doing to help to sort of bring them and authentically engage them in the partnership. With respect to the challenge this spring, I think that we were really, they were a really great partner and really flexible in helping us pivot to a fully virtual format. I think we got a little lucky because we were, sort of Go Carbon Neutral was sort of the first program that they were funding through their social investment strategy that was being executed, right after the pandemic hit. And so we were kind of pioneers among their portfolio of partners in terms of, moving to virtual, which meant that, we had a little bit of a blank slate and, an opportunity to really, experiment. And, the fact that we just did it at all was, great. But I think they were really satisfied with, the data that you shared, in terms of, the students feeling greater sense of efficacy, feeling empowered to engage in these issues. I think that they were really happy with how not only did we do it, but I think we did it pretty well. So yeah, I mean, I think that in a nutshell, the partnership has all been about sort of making sure to draw those connections between what they were looking to achieve and what we were hoping to do with the competition. So I'm happy to answer. I'm looking forward to hearing the questions that we get in the chat and in the Q&A, because I think there's sort of some nuances that are probably worth exploring there in terms of how we were able to manage that partnership.
Yeah, so I'm going to transition over to Cayman now to get a little bit about Greentown's perspective, and I have some sort of starting questions for her, but I also want to invite those of you that are attending to begin to sort of throw things into the session Q&A in the chat. I can moderate that. If you want to hear more about what these sorts of partnerships are and how they developed and all of the nuances that Jacob was just talking about. But Cayman, I want to begin a little bit with you to hear about Greentown, and if you could explain a little bit more about what Greentown is, and then sort of what the feeling was around when you were approached by the museum.
Yes, absolutely. So Greentown Labs, I mentioned we're the largest climate tech incubator in North America, but what does that mean? It means that we're a community of more than 100 clean tech and climate tech entrepreneurs who are committed to solving the world's largest environmental and climate challenges. So we really define climate tech as technological solutions that are going to mitigate the impacts of climate change and build the resilience of people and infrastructure for the future. So you'll see behind me, this is our campus in Somerville, the public space there. It's a 100,000 square foot campus that provides these entrepreneurs the office space, lab space, community spaces that they really need to thrive. But our mission really is to support these entrepreneurs by providing them these physical resources, these virtual resources, but primarily the connections to other entrepreneurs, to investors, to corporate partners, these introductions that they really need to thrive and succeed. And since our founding, we've supported more than 300 climate tech startups who have collectively raised more than $1 billion and created more than 6,500 jobs. So we kind of got our origins in academia. We were founded by four entrepreneurs who got kicked out of their lab space at the university. So we are always really supportive of working with academia and really involving our members in supporting these types of initiatives. So of course, with that context in mind, when Greentown was approached by the Museum of Science to participate in this challenge, we were thrilled. It's an institution that we would love to partner with. The challenge is just truly aligned with our priorities. And we really understand the value and importance of public and private partnerships for driving forward climate action. So we kind of, one thing that struck us is that in addition to promoting kind of the science and technology education and convening these communities, the Museum of Science strives to be a leader in driving forward education on the consequences of climate change. And for us, we feel like this leadership plays such a crucial role in the push for a net zero future. We need all voices in this fight. We need academia. We need the corporate partners like GM. We need the public sector to also be involved to really push forward this fight. Additionally, we were really supportive of the program's mission to connect with students in STEM in the Boston area. We're always eager to engage with budding entrepreneurs. It's something that many of our members and team members do in their free time. And of course, transportation, as we just heard a few minutes ago, is a big source of emissions in Massachusetts. And it's actually a big priority for the state. So we are excited by the focus on mobility and that alignment between the various kind of priorities. And I also just want to give the Museum of Science props, not only for thinking critically about programming and ways to engage the immense talent that is in the Boston area, but also for pushing forward through COVID and figuring out how to turn this into a virtual program really quickly. It's a huge lift.
Awesome. Thank you. So we sort of always have like a pre-competition briefing and a post-competition debrief where we sort of talk about what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I think that key to most of the partnerships that we at the museum have is flexibility, right? Ensuring that things change over time and that goals might even shift. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what has been most beneficial about this partnership and what are some ways that Greentown thinks it could be improved or would directions it would like to see it go?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, just kind of thinking about how this was beneficial. As I mentioned, this program, it clearly aligns with our efforts as a community that's committed to climate tech entrepreneurship. We're always proud to engage in programs that are fostering the next generation of entrepreneurs. It's also really strategic for our community to be aligned with the Museum of Science and with this program, especially as our members are looking for more diverse talent. It's really wonderful to learn that that's going to be a focus of the next program, trying to bring in those underrepresented voices. And we had a couple mentors from our community who participated, and I heard wonderful feedback from them. I'm not surprised at all by the people who did get involved. These are the people who are actively engaged today in our efforts to empower future generations. And of course, they're getting involved to help build a talent pipeline and pass on their knowledge and experience to try to clear the pathway for other entrepreneurs. So I think that's kind of at a high level. I think if you think more tactically, we are always trying to bring in new entrepreneurs who have new ideas, and so it starts at the academics community, and then it kind of goes from there.
Yeah.
And then, did you ask me how it could be improved as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a couple ideas. It was really fun to kind of talk to some other Greentown Labs team members who got involved. So one thing that we heard is that it would be really wonderful to engage more students, so more student engagement and outreach to universities. So of course, recognizing the challenges of COVID-19, an ideal scenario would be that there's lots of resources available to recruiting students or leveraging partnerships like Greentown Labs. But of course, if we want to bring in underrepresented voices or minorities, then we need to expand the reach and reach out to different universities that maybe haven't been engaged before. And this is something that we're trying to work on as well. And you can leverage the previous students. I know if I was a graduate of this program, I would want to help my fellow peers participate and share information about these opportunities. So leveraging the existing network and trying to reach more students. Another kind of idea that came up is more industry engagement and mentorship. It's really great that GM was involved and that they were providing mentors within the program, and they have these clear goals that this program's helping them achieve those clear goals for driving forward net zero solutions. But it provides a big opportunity for students. So for example, I believe there was a student group that worked on a project related to the MBTA. They would have benefited tremendously from discussions with Keolis, who operates the T. So bringing in these other partners who can work with these students during the program and offer additional support, because while a cash prize is wonderful, students need to graduate with job experience. So partners could offer a paid summer internship as a prize, maybe to work further on building out their project, and that would dramatically make a difference in these students' lives. The last thing I think I'll mention is that there's a big opportunity for Massachusetts to collaborate. Well, for this program, actually, the Go Carbon Neutral, to collaborate with the supportive government that we're just so lucky to have here in Massachusetts. So for example, you could bring in Secretary Theoharides. She's the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and she's a leader of the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a regional program that's focused on capping and reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector across the Northeast. And so they aim to really invest these proceeds into a cleaner, more resilient, and more equitable transportation system. And so the Go Carbon Neutral is just very much aligned with their regional transportation goals. And we can bring in amazing speakers like the Secretary to inspire these students. They also have very detailed state goals within this initiative. So for example, if you look deeper at it, there's a focus on clean vehicles and fuels, including electric vehicle infrastructure planning. And so there's an opportunity to bring in the public and private sector and these students together to offer tracks within the program that are enabling us to meet those detailed goals. So by pairing those certain mentors.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I'll add, because all of those are really great suggestions. And I think what I really love about sort of this community convening that we at the museum are doing is that when we bring these different partners to the table, they have these different perspectives and can share that. And so this is how we grow programs like Go Carbon Neutral and achieve these goals and go back to General Motors and say we're expanding the reach of the challenge, is by having the members who are already participating saying, well, who isn't at the table, who can you bring, and even in this case suggesting who those partners could be, facilitating introductions so that you can build that sort of trusting relationship with partners as you grow. And that has been really, really productive in a lot of the sort of collaborative convening sessions that we've been having. So moving on, if you could touch on a little bit about sort of what you, from your perspective, what you think competitors have benefited from through Greentown's participation.
Yeah, well, so as a mentor of entrepreneurs and of students, I have no doubt that the students who participated benefited a lot, if not from mentorship about, the technical and business milestones that they would need to achieve to drive forward a solution like this, the professional development and exposure, the exposure to the kind of innovation community that's in Boston. I know when I was a student, I didn't really learn about this whole world of entrepreneurship and clean tech development in Boston until the very end of my undergraduate career. So these students getting this invaluable exposure to this broader climate tech community before they've even graduated is really awesome. Of course, it sounds like there was resources for building out their new ideas, like the mentorship, the getting to kind of understand what happens at the industry level. It's a real life example of entrepreneurship. It makes this a tangible experience for students about thinking about what they're going to do after graduation or what is possible. So some students might not even have access to entrepreneurship programs in their universities. We're lucky to have a lot of universities in Boston who do have programs, but they vary by school. So I think it's just a great opportunity to reach more students who don't really have that opportunity otherwise.
Great. I want to mention we have just about 13 minutes left, so if anyone in the audience does have questions, we are more than happy to take those, and I want to make sure we have enough time to answer them. I'll continue to stay on the session and Q&A afterwards, although they have already informed me that they are kicking us out right at 2:30 from the Zoom room. So if you want your answer in person, please feel free to stick it in either the session Q&A or chat. I want to move to a question just sort of more generally here for you, Cayman, about what role you think private organizations can play towards moving us towards a net zero future.
That's a great question. So at Greentown Labs, one thing I neglected to share is that we are currently a public benefit corporation that relies entirely on private funding. And we're really fortunate to work with dozens of forward-thinking corporations who have announced bold science-based climate goals and are actively committed to supporting startups that are in kind of the high technology, energy, environmental space. So as kind of key stakeholders within the global climate tech innovation ecosystem, these guys are often becoming investors and pilot sites and first customers for startups, helping them really go further faster. So it's completely different from a biotech company or like a software company that can grow really quickly and then enter the market. It's a much harder pathway for technology in general. And without the industry partnership, it's almost impossible to enter. You need to have a good understanding of the market, and those kind of players really have a monopoly on that. So we work really closely with corporates. We believe it's paramount to the success of our entrepreneurs and to the global transition to a more sustainable economy and addressing climate change. We know that these corporates that are getting involved, they're getting involved because they recognize that they are the biggest contributors to the crisis of climate change. So we really work with these partners from the perspective of wanting to divert their resources towards climate action, but also they provide really valuable resources for our members, not just the opportunity to pilot the technology or to have become customers of these startups, but to provide kind of those industry perspectives and market insight that would be otherwise impossible to receive. So I think my hope is that we continue to see kind of the Microsofts of the world come forward with these ambitious climate plans where they're not only going to be thinking about how they can drive forward action moving forward, but how they can reclaim those historical emissions that they have generated.
Awesome. We have a question that's come into the chat here that I want to get to, and I think probably both Jacob and I can provide a little bit of answer. I might have you start, Jacob. How is success defined in terms of engaging college youth, and in what timeline?
I guess there's, I think we've been measuring success on, a couple dimensions, because, I think like, if you think about go carbon neutral as a funnel, there's this big, large, public push to, gain submissions, gain submissions and proposals to the program, and then we narrow that down to, semifinalists, and then that gets narrowed even further to the winners of the competition. So, so like at each level, there's like different measures of success. So in the initial piece, we're measuring just impressions, awareness of the competition, which is in the thousands or even tens of thousands of impressions and engagements on social media posts and, Instagram stories and all the other ways that we use to sort of push this out to the college student audience. But then, once we get to the sort of mid-level of the semifinalist teams, the students who actually like become engaged in the process of developing proposals, getting mentorship and things like that, then I think our sort of perspective on what success is shifts from quantity to quality. And I think that's what's really what was really captured in the data that Jonathan showed, that the students are that we're seeing meaningful shifts in the students' sort of feelings of empowerment and engagement with climate change. I mean, it's a self-selecting group, so they were already sort of interested. Many of them already have interest in engineering and technology and addressing the impacts of climate change or reversing the impacts of climate change. But like seeing those shifts where I think one of the most interesting things from the data from this year was how students talked about how it helped them to refine how they thought about what they could do. And how they could, have an impact, and the different ways that they could have an impact. A lot of them, hadn't thought about how, a company like GM might be a place where they could work and have an impact on, climate change. So, it's like I think that there are a couple levels depending on which part of the competition that we're talking about, whether it's sort of like broad-based awareness to really deep engagement, and I think that we can be I think we've been pretty satisfied with how things have turned out on each of those levels.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I pushed it off to Jacob first because he's more concerned with, I would say, institutional survivability, how the museum can function as a business. In community initiatives, my focus is more on increasing our local relevance, right? And so it's much more a qualitative, hard to measure sort of thing. In any sort of quantitative fashion that then Jacob has the trouble of trying to find dollars for, right? But for me, when I think about how we are defining success with this challenge, it is in giving young entrepreneurs, young individuals who may or may not feel that they have a voice in STEM, a place to express their voice, right? To feel that they are connected to an institution like the Museum of Science. So to address the follow-up question a little bit there, Cayman mentioned earlier that one of the things that we could improve on, and I absolutely agree, is creating a community of former competitors. And that is one of the things that I think has really improved with this second year. In the first year, we had these sort of like fixed physical events, one at Greentown and one at the Museum of Science, and they were great, and we had great conversations with the competitors there. But then they sort of went off into the wind, and we tried to reach out perhaps too late later, and many of them had sort of moved on and weren't willing to come back. In this particular year, I was engaged in so many email communications with so many of the competitors, just sort of trying to figure out what the competition was to begin with, right? And then trying to provide as much support as possible throughout the process, that I think we had much more, a much more supportive relationship. And I've continued some of those relationships afterward to sort of see where they're going in their community. We had this big push on LinkedIn, so we're connected with them through that, and we can follow them professionally and then draw from them. Hopefully they feel that the Museum of Science is a friend, and that we can continue to grow that community of current and former competitors within the challenge itself and more broadly within the museum.
And Jonathan, if you don't mind, I would love to share or elaborate on that by sharing some feedback I heard from one of our mentors who participated in this second round. It was the mentor is Reese Daniel. He's the co-founder of SumEV, and he just talked about such a rewarding and wonderful experience he had. He was really impressed with the Museum of Science adaptability and perseverance. But one thing he mentioned was that he and his team, they went into the relationship both not realizing how much they would enjoy working together. And they came out of it with that mutual feeling of just an overall great experience. He said at the beginning, there was a little bit of a lack of enthusiasm about being assigned a mentor. They felt like he was just there to help them with the pitch deck or PowerPoint deck. And then they realized how much he had to offer, and they were just so grateful. He brought a lot to the experience as he's been immersed in the micromobility space for quite some time now. And one thing that he helped them realize was just how big of a space this is and how many resources were out there for them, like even just newsletters and reading and competitions and events. I think up until then, they felt like they were operating a little bit in a vacuum, but Reese was really able to show them that this was not the case. There's an entire community, not just in Boston or in the United States, but around the world. And there are so many opportunities for them to save kind of time and money and energy by studying what's going on at the industry as a whole. But it was just such a wonderful testimony that I had to pass on.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love that. Well, we are coming up on time here, so I may start to draw to a conclusion. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to continue posting them in the chat. We can continue to monitor that after we're kicked out of the Zoom room here. And as well, feel free to reach out to us through the Whova platform or via email or anything like that if you have additional questions that you want to have answered. I think we're all more than happy to do that. But I want to thank Jacob and especially Cayman and Greentown for coming today and sort of talking through that, and hope it was a valuable experience for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really just thankful to be here on behalf of Greentown.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, Cayman.
All right, and now I'm not sure how this session actually ends, but I think we just leave the meeting room, right?
I got you covered there.
All right.
Here we go.